welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. In this week's Earth Feels podcast, Rose and Christine wrestle with the question of whether or not climate-concerned people should stop flying. Christine also struggles with a cold and tries not to hack into the microphone too often. Also, Mark, Christine's husband, drops by for a quick input on algae fuels, which is something that he's done a fair bit of research on, and also in the Earth Feels version of Where's Waldo? See if you can find the door slam that could not be edited out. Let's get started. Should climate-concerned people stop flying? And this is something that Rose and I have talked about before. We've talked about it on this podcast before and beyond. It's a conversation that I think I've mentioned before my husband and I have, and we come to different conclusions. So let's talk about this, Rose. I know you just flew back from California. So let's chat.
So yeah, I consider myself to be pretty interested in what's going on with the climate. And yet I also know that my kids live on the West Coast, so there's just no way that I won't be going to visit them. And while I know that Christine made this journey, and I would
epic journey.
I was going to say grueling journey, 4 days across Canada, Trans-Canada, to get from where? From Toronto to Vancouver? Okay. Yep. You're a better woman than I.
Maybe.
Well, so we're coming into Thanksgiving. U.S. Thanksgiving is 2 days from now, and of course, doing statistic analysis during the 12-day travel period around this Thanksgiving holiday, a record-breaking 31.6 million passengers are expected to fly in the U.S., and that's 4% over last year. So
that's up. It's up 4%.
Up 4%, up 3.7%. I went back and looked at our Drawdown, the book that we've been talking about, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And they had a statistic in there from 2013 that more than 3 billion airplane tickets were sold in 2013. So it amounts to 2.5% of emissions globally. And there's about 20,000 airplanes right now, but by 2050, they are expected to be 50,000 airplanes. So in spite of everything that we're talking about emissions-wise, the airlines are not looking to reduce.
Nor are most people looking to reduce.
Nor are most people looking to reduce. And I have, a number of friends who are, I would say, pretty strong climate activists. And they're always posting about how they're flying here, there, and everywhere. Again, they have children or family, and people are more and more space in between. And that is a big part of life, friends and family, and being able to spend time with them. And that's probably, for me, one of the more pleasurable things in my life is getting together with friends and family. So, so how do we, I can't personally say, I can say personally that I know I will not stop flying. So how can I offset it, or how can I make the effects of my travel less? I guess that's kind of what I see.
And I will say that I did invite my husband to come on this show to present his point of view, which is different than mine. So, yes, I made the decision on the airplane flying back from Vancouver for my daughter's graduation last May. And it was when Greta Thunberg was in the news more, and we, she was making it clear that because of this climate emergency, she was not going to fly anywhere. And in fact, we know she got to North America and spent, however, it was, I don't know, was it even 6 months here? It was supposed to be longer, but because the UN climate talks were moved from Chile back over the ocean, the Atlantic, to Spain.
To Spain.
Now she's currently on a boat, silver powered boat, back to Europe. So it was in the news, and it just felt to me as I was flying that I came to an inner knowing that for me this needs to change in response. And by this I mean flying as often. I mean, I don't, I probably have been flying twice a year for the last couple of years, maybe um, 3 times a year. But it just needs to stop. And I think also I went on to say my husband is not happy with that conclusion, and in any relationship, at least one that needs to have a chance of being a good one, there's always compromises. And so the compromise that we came to is that I will fly once a year. And his position is that, yes, he, as a climate concerned person, very climate concerned person, he realizes that air travel has a negative effect. It puts out a lot of emissions and it contributes to the climate emergency. But he said he believes at this point our society is not going to stop flying. And so what we need, I mean, unless it collapses altogether. In the meantime, that there needs to be pursuit of active alternatives to flying. And he's done a lot of work and is interested in biofuels, particularly algae, and their use in the use in airplanes. And that's something that I don't have those stats at my fingertips, but something maybe we can put up an article or two about what the developments are happening. But it's still developing. In the meantime, every time you get on an airplane, you're emitting. Now, having said that and talked about how I wouldn't fly, I saw an alarming article when I was on my plane, trains, and automobiles journey, because I did fly once from Northern Ontario into Toronto early in October, and then the rest of the time was driving or training or busing. And I saw something about the emissions from a train being considerably higher than driving. So I'm not sure. I need to look into that. So none of
Well,
us are lily white.
Yeah, no, I was looking at that too. And I think, so a couple things. We'll talk about the train thing first. In Europe, where trains are electric versus in the States where, maybe this is true in Canada as well, you'd have to be,
Diesel powered.
Diesel. So yeah, so trains are not that, I mean, obviously you've got more people on a train than you have in individual cars, but in terms of trains are not clean because they're spewing diesel or they're using diesel. So trains are not clean. One of the things, so I started doing a lot of Googling about the different things for flights, and probably this has occurred to people who, like you, who have thought about it. But one thing is, saving the planet can be your excuse for spending the extra money to fly direct, because it's the takeoff, the propulsion of takeoff, that is what uses most of the fuel, and that's where a lot of it's emitted. So so that's one thing. The second thing is you can bundle your flights. So for instance, I will be in California for the winter, I'm planning on coming up to Seattle around Valentine's Day for a women's convention. And, that's kind of in the back of my mind that I'm planning to do that. And then I'm also planning to see my son in the Bay Area at some point. And I was like, well, instead of making those two separate trips, I could have three legs, right? I could go to Seattle and then fly back to the Bay Area and then back to San Diego, as opposed to coming back to San Diego and making so you're having three legs instead of four legs. I think there are ways to diminish what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, that's that's my whitewashing it, but that's my way of saying, okay, well, I do fly direct most places anymore. That's more of an age thing, but I but I can say that, I don't like to do the up and down and then get stranded someplace in between. But when I was at San Diego coming back the other day, I came across the airport. I thought this was really interesting. The airport has um, an alliance with a company it's called the Good Traveler. And there are a number, maybe 10 or 15 airports here in the United States that they have partnered with, and it's carbon offset. So for people that don't remember, to just refresh your memory, carbon offsets are financial contributions to projects that are helping to reduce CO2 emissions in various industries. So it can be whether they're, holding on to methane capture, or they're planting trees, or whatever they're doing. So when you fly, whatever you're emitting, you can pay a certain amount of dollars towards these projects. I think that's a possibility as well for those of us who can afford to travel.
And I would say probably that's the minimum that
Mm-hmm.
people who fly should do, is offset your emissions. There's some discussion about, is that just kind of a way to have your cake and eat it too, to
Yeah,
fly as much as you want.
ease your conscience. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was
but
calling whitewashing. Yeah.
but um, if you're going to fly anyways, then definitely offset your emissions, and we have done that with different ways, including there's actually a Mennonite church in Winnipeg that we know of. We have a friend who attends, who they have a fund that you can deposit when you fly, that they put towards carbon offset projects. So it's kind of almost
So
give
for their
local.
parishioners, yeah. So for the
But we've
parishioners,
given, and we're not part of that church, but you can give to the fund. Anybody can give to the fund. So I feel good about it because I know the people who are involved,
nice.
and they have integrity. So yes, definitely carbon offsets. And people who say, well, can't afford the offsets, I'm already paying for my flight. Of course, I would say, interesting.
Right. Well, so there's there's a UN agreement that's called Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. So it's, again, the longer flights are the most detrimental in terms of, because they fly higher. If you're flying higher in the atmosphere, I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know that. So in 2018 in Montreal, the UN put out this agreement that a number of countries have gone on board with. And there's a voluntary phase that the voluntary pilot phase starts in 2021, and it allows members to pick a year for carbon emissions that may actually be lower than the year that they're in. So they're doing some kind of they're offering some kind of incentive for the countries that sign up earlier and actually stick with it.
And stick with what?
Stick with paying for carbon offset. So the member states that are willing to pay for their offset early in 2021, it's not going to be mandatory until 2027. So they're trying to get people on board, and they're giving them a better deal. and the people that come in later will be paying more for their carbon
And people, you
offsets.
mean like countries?
Countries. I think it's countries because it's UN derived. Yeah.
What's
If it's
the
individual,
focus? Sorry, I'm a bit.
it's to offset extra emissions. It's because there has been nothing, transportation like ships and airlines were never part of the original UN climate accord, which is interesting.
Well, it sounds like it should definitely be included. So ships and planes aren't included.
They weren't included in the
In
original
the Paris Agreement. Huh.
right.
Well,
So the UN was trying to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, let's start up this other kind of agreement, and we'll have a pilot program where people will voluntarily come in, and then we'll give you get to pick the year that you want where the climate where and I don't really understand this. You get to pick the year where what your climate emissions were, and it's based on that. But as you come in farther down the road, if in fact air travel has exacerbated and gotten spewing more emissions, if you don't come in until 5 years later, then the emissions are going to be more costly then than they were in the beginning.
and it's interesting. I hadn't heard that. Again, I don't follow the treaty really closely, the climate treaty. But I was reading an article recently that talked about how some people aren't acknowledge that the Paris Climate Accord isn't enough, and they're concerned, and they're quite alarmed that it's not aggressive enough. And it was comparing the Paris Climate Accord to the Montreal Protocol, which addressed the hole in the ozone layer, and how much of those targets were inadequate in the first agreement and were voluntary and not mandatory. And then once the initial groundwork was done, as the years went along, it became mandatory, and the targets became harder and more science-based, and so on. And so this article was just saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a really important first step. And as we come up to the UN climate negotiations again next week, I thought I would just add this. So I'm glad you brought that up. And what does that mean for planes, trains, and automobiles?
Well, I think initially they were looking at 10 years ago when they started this whole idea of carbon offset. It was really up to the customer. So some airlines and travel companies like Expedia offered the offsets to the customer, and for probably the exact reason that you're saying, people were like, oh well, I've already spent my money on my airfare, I'm not going to do that. Well, so now it's kind of come down to the airlines, and certainly, like I was saying, some of the airports are getting on board with it, and then it's going to be up to individual countries to we have to do this, because if air travel is not going to stop, which it seems like it's not, what other things can we do though beyond just the carbon offsetting? There was some I'm wondering, so electric cars, electric trains, is there a possibility of electric airplanes? And so I was looking, there is a company out of Seattle where I lived for 30 years called Harbor Air, and they
Hey,
flew.
I thought they were out of Victoria.
Oh, they might be Vancouver actually, but they operate right in downtown Seattle.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're saying they want to become the world's first all-electric airline by 2022.
Now their fleet is smaller float planes.
Right, they're prop driven. They're seaplanes. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
that's a really good point. Harbor Air is definitely leading the way, and that's an exciting initiative.
They fly 500,000 people a year. So they're they come in and out of Lake Union and that land on the water, and so that's kind of maybe that's why I was thinking they were there.
Well, they
Out of the
fly.
restaurant, watch them come in.
Okay, and they fly between Victoria and Vancouver a lot, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
in Victoria right now, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Have we ever flown with Harbour Air? Maybe once, but yeah, they go back and forth a lot. So I love that that's what they're doing.
But then then it comes up to like battery storage. So you've ridden in a Tesla. I mean, I've test driven a Tesla.
Hmm.
Um, the car
I've
is really,
driven. I've done more than ride in one. I, my dear, have driven a
oh,
Tesla
okay.
for
Okay.
15 minutes.
Can I know you?
Well, it's funny. My husband and daughter, who my daughter and her boyfriend own the Tesla, and they're ready to disown me in basically because. So I drove it. We have a plug-in hybrid, so
Mm-hmm.
which goes 80 kilometers on electric. It's a Chevy Volt, and after I drove the Tesla, I'm like, okay, it's okay. Like, and they're like, just okay. And yeah, they're ready to disown me for my lack of appreciation for the sophisticated machine that the Tesla is. It's a car, it drives, it gets one there.
Hi, Mark.
Rose says hello.
Hi, Rose.
Is there anything you want to add? We're talking about can airplanes go electric, and Rose found out the information about Harbour Air, but is that really the way to do it, or is it biofuel?
I think a combination of solutions is important. I don't think we're going to get cross ocean travel by all electric airplanes. The batteries just aren't able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But a combination of hybrid electric jet engines with biofuels could bring emissions, way down. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it'll be interesting to see how fast that technology develops, but it's already being developed.
So can you talked about biofuels, can you give us an update on what's happening with them?
All I know is that the technology is there, but it's not being scaled up very quickly because of various limitations, land availability, the cost of electricity, different things like that, which will improve, but I think a price on carbon would bring it along much quicker.
Mm.
Okay, so there's a plug for pricing carbon.
And for biofuels.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I found interesting is that the FAA hasn't approved electric aircraft for passenger travel anyway. So that's going to be a whole nother hoop that they have to jump through. So that's what the article on Harbour Air was saying. It's like they're working towards this for 2022, but the FAA has to get on board.
Well, and I guess as a potential passenger, the passengers will want it to be safety tested. So
Sure.
we want to make sure that it'll work, that they won't suddenly run out mid-air.
In terms of fuel efficiency, so fuel efficiency is tied into the whole idea of CO2 emissions then, so the less fuel they have to use. And it kind of behooves the airlines to get on board with it, because I think it's something like 40% of their cost is fuel. So if they can be more fuel efficient, then they can be more profitable.
No, never. And maybe they can feed us better food, or actually feed us
food at all. But the fact that it seems like when things are profit driven, there's more of an incentive. I think it will behoove the airlines, because fuel efficiency is tied directly to the amount of CO2 that's being emitted, so that the more efficient they are, the less CO2 is being spewed. And the airlines, 40%, about 40%, it's in that range of their costs are associated with fuel. So
yeah,
it seems like they would want to become more efficient.
Mm-hmm. I was just reading an article, not about airplanes, but about fleets. Was it maybe in relationship to the fact that California is being more aggressive in purchasing electric cars for its government fleets, but the money saving in gas and maintenance, it's huge. So going electric, whether it's airplanes or cars, or, well, trains are another thing because they all have to be replaced. And I guess Is that the case with airplanes? I don't know. We'll have to see. That's the advantage of biofuels versus an electric plane, because you'd have to replace all of the fleets if you went electric. Whereas if you just change the kind of fuel that a
Interesting.
plane uses, then you can use the same plane, one would think. And so, yeah, it's so, as with everything having to do with climate change, it's so multifaceted.
There's
And
lots of opportunity, though. I mean, certainly there's
yes,
cost, like you're saying, there's costs associated with the startup, but there's so much opportunity for new technology and jobs to create this kind of thing, and can be very positive. Infinite
mhm.
possibilities, infinite possibilities.
So, what is our conclusion? Is there a conclusion then to the question?
Your question was should people who are concerned with climate stop flying?
Yeah,
And um, and
what have we concluded?
I don't think we have. I think it's going to be a personal thing, like everything else. Um, it would be best if we could diminish the number of flights we make. I think you can bundle flights. I think you can, look at um,
Direct flights?
direct flights. Do what you can. I think a lot of personal travel is a big part of it, but how many businesses send people to be in meetings? My environmental engineering son was saying a group of them just met for a meeting in Vegas, and they flew in from everywhere, and got there and drove to got to their hotels, and then rented their cars and drove to the meeting room, and they were in the meeting room for 2 hours to have
Really?
face-to-face meetings, and then everybody left. And he's like, okay, so he's not
That's
flying.
shocking.
He's not flying. It's not necessarily his company that's doing it, because they are the contractor, but it's the client that has all these moving pieces are going, and they want all these people to interface. But how much, I mean, you and I seem to be able to talk online. The technology of being able to meet online versus, do we really have to be face to face? Maybe you want to do it once a year, but do you need to do it once a month?
And especially for a 2-hour meeting.
Oh, well, I know it's just
But
craziness, but
that
the
probably,
client, that's what the client wants, so
right.
that's what the client gets.
Well, and it probably is standard practice. So then the challenge is to change that standard.
And again, efficiency wise and
I know.
cost wise, it seems pretty crazy, but I'm sure there
Yeah.
are a lot of businesses that's how they operate.
But so my background is that I worked in telemedicine project, a pilot project, back in 2001. They were starting off. So I'm really comfortable with using video. I'm an early adopter again, or I was, because of the project. And that was
Hmm.
using video to connect people in northern remote First Nations communities in northern Canada with specialists and sometimes just family doctors, because there's no doctors in those communities. There's
Hmm.
hopefully nurses, but not always. And so you connect them with nurses or doctors or specialists in like Toronto, connecting up with somebody on the James Bay coast. And so I'm really comfortable with that technology. I think it's wonderful. And now that I can do it like you and I are doing via Zoom, or I see clients online with Zoom all the time. I have uh, this meeting today. I have a business meeting tomorrow morning. I'm seeing a client in the afternoon, and then I have meeting with the Green Party of Ontario, in the evening, and I use it all the time, and it's amazing.
Hmm.
So I think it's just that's a cultural shift, a mind shift, a business
Right, and
culture shift.
it's an awareness of what can we do to
Reduce.
our carbon footprint. And I
Hmm.
think, so I think that we can start with looking at the flights that we're making, and are they necessary? Are they necessary?
Well, and I'm interested. I'm going to do some research about train versus plane.
Hmm.
versus car, because bus is the best. I did take you. You did drop me off at the bus depot in Boston, and I did take a bus from Boston to Toronto.
No, is bus the best?
Yeah, actually, it
Really?
is. Yeah.
I get so motion sickness. I can't. I have to sit
Oh,
right in the very front seat of the bus. Otherwise, I'm like,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. So looking at alternatives, considering direct flights, definitely every flight offsetting emissions, and what else? Using video conferencing whenever possible.
Yeah, and if you work in an industry where you feel like you don't want to be away from your home and your family and your kids, and can you go into your boss and say, can't we do this online? And now you have an environmental reason
There you go.
as well as a cost reason to say,
There you go.
yeah.
Okay, so do we have some good news?
Well, the good news,
today?
there was a couple of good news articles this week. I thought number one was the Harvard-Yale disruption, the Harvard-Yale football game disruption. I think it was like 200 protesters came on the field and disrupted the game to make a statement that Harvard and Yale need to be divesting of fossil fuels. I think a bunch of them got arrested.
Mhm.
And did you say that we have a clip of the captain of the Harvard football team?
I believe so. Somebody from the team, I think it was a quarterback,
Okay.
saying that nobody wins if Harvard doesn't divest.
Yeah,
So,
very, very cool. Very cool.
mhm,
And
yes.
then the second good news story I saw actually just today was Coldplay, the band, has suspended their tour for their newest album until they can figure out a more sustainable way to tour. And the article, I think it was in the Washington Post, it talks about Coldplay is joining Adele. There were two other bands, Jack Johnson. I can't remember what the other one was, but we'll include that link too. So Coldplay is suspending their tour and the Harvard Yale disruption. So it is we all can do something. So what can you do? What can we all do?
Yes. So what is our unfreeze yourself action step? Speaking of what can we do?
Well, I think it's take a look at your flights. Take a look at your flights and how can you reduce them or how can you offset them and make the commitment to offset.
Yeah, if you can find the money to fly, find the money to offset. Okay, and have conversations. The holiday season is coming up. Thanksgiving has just happened, but Christmas is still ahead. So having this conversation with your friends and family. There's a climate emergency. What does that mean in terms of air travel? So
lots to discuss.
And another thing to do for the sanity tip, speaking of those get-togethers, either before, after, or maybe both before and after you having this discussion about air travel, make sure you get enough hugs. I was just reminded recently, I was reading some articles about how wonderful hugs are for our immunity. So it boosts our immunity. It's good for our mental health, and it's good for stress relief, and just overall general well-being. I think, what is it, 4 hugs a day for like minimum, 8 for maintenance, and 12 hugs a day for growth. Isn't that what we were just reading? Virginia Satir, the family therapist, recommends. So I'm trying to think. I do not know if I got 4 hugs yesterday, and
well, can you so if you didn't get them on one day, can you make up for the next day? I have a friend who has a wellness business. It's called the Center for Heart Intention, and she introduced me to. Her name is Kathleen Redmond, and she introduced me to heart hugs. And it's the idea of when you are holding someone, can you have the right side of your body to the right side of their body, and let your heart's the resonance of your heart 20 seconds up against each other is supposed to help ground you more. So think about that when you're hugging someone.
There you go. So you can do a regular hug or a heart hug. Both are going to be helpful.
Heart hugs.
Heart to heart hug. At least 20 seconds either way is whichever hug you're doing 20 seconds or more is recommended.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks for listening. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me. You see, your mother, she has been suffering, and the truth is told beneath the sea.